Walk down any transient dock from the Chesapeake to Puget Sound, and you will see them tied up 10 feet apart. One boat gleaming, fresh canvas, a listing sheet in the window north of $300,000, and an engine room that will cost the next owner more in parts than the hull is worth. The other one looks like it was commissioned during the Ford administration, because it was. Chalky gel coat, tired teak, and down below a cast-iron 6-cylinder that has been turning over since 1978 on nothing but a filter and a can of 1540. Naturally aspirated. Mechanically injected. No turbo to fail at sea, no computer to throw a code at the fuel dock. That engine is the reason the tired-looking trawler will still be crossing water in 20 years, while the shiny one bleeds storage fees on the hard. Today, I am giving you 6 diesels that run forever, and the 3 that every working mechanic refuses to touch, and the difference comes down to one thing the listing agent will never bring up. Here's the rule. Every engine on the forever list shares its block with something that never touched salt water. A tractor, a highway truck, a generator bolted to the floor of a grain elevator in Kansas. The parts sit on a shelf in a farm supply warehouse right now, cross-referenced to a casting number that has not changed in decades. Every engine on the refuse list is the opposite. The day the manufacturer stopped cataloging the part, the clock started, and no amount of good maintenance can outrun an empty shelf. Number 6 is the one that powered half the sailboats ever launched. Number 6, the Perkins 4108, 1.76 liters, 4 cylinders, naturally aspirated, 51 horsepower at 4,000 revolutions per minute, with a continuous rating at 3,000. Perkins first showed it at a boat show in New York in 1960 and kept building it through the 1980s. The signature weakness is the rear crankshaft seal. It leaks oil. Every owner knows it, and it is a fixable nuisance, not a structural failure. Owners report 5,000 to 15,000 hours before a rebuild, and one documented case ran to 15,000 hours still pulling clean compression. A used 4108 costs a few hundred to a couple of $1,000s. A full repower runs 15 to 25,000. If you find one that starts clean and holds oil pressure, the engine is not your problem. If you cannot stomach the occasional drip in the bilge, look elsewhere. The next one is a V8 that powered fishing boats and trawlers alike, and the version you want is the one most buyers walk right past. Number 5, the Caterpillar 3208, naturally aspirated. 10.4 liters, 636 cubic inches, 210 horsepower, mechanical direct injection. Cat introduced it in the early 70s, and it found homes in Grand Banks trawlers, sport fishers, and Maine lobster boats. The version you want is the naturally aspirated 210, not the turbocharged 375. The turbo lives a shorter life, rated by total fuel burn rather than hours. The naturally aspirated block goes 8 to 10,000 hours with care. The headache is the cast iron exhaust risers, which rust through and cost real money to replace. Dry sleeves mean you cannot drop in new cylinder liners when it wears. Cat still supports older products through its dealer network, which matters far from home. Find a naturally aspirated 3208 with clean oil samples and budget for the risers. If you need the horsepower for a planing hull, this is not your engine. The one that follows is the diesel your mechanic actually enjoys working on. Number 4, the Yanmar GM and JH series. The 3GM30, rated at 27 horsepower with 3 cylinders, and the 4JH family, rated at 39 to 80 plus horsepower with 4 cylinders, have been the default small diesel in production sailboats for close to 40 years. Japanese engineering, tight tolerances, and a distributor network that reaches most cruising destinations on Earth. Owners report 8,000 to 10,000 hours before a rebuild, and one factory representative quoted 20,000 as the ceiling. The honest downside is noise. The earlier GM series has a fuel knock from the pre-combustion chamber that sounds like the bottom end is coming apart. It is not. You get used to it, or you invest in sound insulation. Exhaust elbows are the service item to watch, and parts are priced at a premium through the authorized channel. If you want something your mechanic recognizes on site, this is it. Shop the aftermarket hard on consumables. The next one went around the entire world on a single engine and came home asking for nothing but filters and a coolant hose. Number 3. The John Deere 60068, 6.8 liters, inline 6, turbocharged, 158 to over 300 horsepower, depending on the duty rating. The heaviest commercial rating is built for 24-hour continuous operation at 3,000 hours a year. One well-documented single-engine trawler crossed oceans, rounded capes, and logged over 12,600 hours on its 60068 with no major work. Filters, oil, impellers, one coolant hose. The company out of Seattle that marinizes engines for the Alaskan commercial fishing fleet uses the same Deere blocks, and Bristol Bay operators expect 10,000 hours as a floor. The catch is that electronically controlled versions need dealer software for diagnostics. The Deere dealer network stretches worldwide, which is a genuine edge for offshore cruising. If you find a 60068 with records, you have found the engine. If you want to do your own injector work at anchor with no laptop, look at the next 2. If you'd rather hear it from the yard than the showroom, hit subscribe. There's a new one every other day. Number 2. The Cummins 6 BT 5.9, the 12-valve. 5.9 liters, inline 6, 12 valves, a mechanical Bosch injection pump, and nothing electronic between the throttle and the fuel. This is the engine that went into the Dodge Ram in 1989 and made that truck a religion. The turbocharged 6BT makes 160 to 210, still fully mechanical, still no computer. The 6BT adds an aftercooler and pushes 210 to 370. The reason it sits at number 2 is parts cost. A factory remanufactured bobtail engine runs around $18,000 to $22,000. A full twin repower with transmissions, mounts, and labor comes in around $45,000 to $70,000. The 6BTA runs raw seawater through its aftercooler core, and that component demands attention in warm salt water. Find one with records and oil samples, and you have the most cost-effective marine diesel available. If the records are missing, assume the aftercooler needs service and price accordingly. The engine at number 1 is the diesel every trawler owner has an opinion about, and the reason none of them can bring themselves to let it go. Number 1, the Ford Lehman 120, Ford Dorset 2715E base engine, 6.2 liters, 380 cubic inches, inline 6, naturally aspirated, mechanically injected, 120 horsepower at 2,500 RPM. Lehman marinized these from the mid-60s through the early 90s, and they powered Grand Banks, Marine Traders, CHBs, and dozens more that crossed oceans on less than 2 gallons an hour. No turbo, no computer. Nothing between the throttle and the fuel but a cable and a mechanical pump. The most respected Lehman shop in the country puts the overhaul interval at 12 to 14,000 hours. Owners argue higher. Some experienced hands estimate fewer than 2% of Ford Lehmans ever actually wear out. Most are retired because the boat around them fell apart. The vulnerability is the cooling system. Skip the impeller, ignore the zincs, let the heat exchanger scale, and the engine overheats. That is what kills them. But the parts are still manufactured, still cross-referenced to Ford industrial castings on shelves for 60 years. If you need more than 120 horses or speeds above hull speed, it is not for you. For everyone else, this is the diesel. Those are your 6. But there are 3 more I need to show you, and these are the ones that make a working diesel mechanic glance into the engine room, close the hatch, and discover he has somewhere else to be. Number 3 on the refuse list, the Volvo Penta TAM D series, specifically the older discontinued models, the TAM D60, the 70, the 71. I need to be square here because the people who have run these for decades will be watching, and they know what they have. The base engines are solid. A pair of TAM D40Bs from 1985 with 6,800 hours were still running clean at 3.2 gallons per hour combined. That is not a bad engine. The problem is the parts ecosystem. Volvo's North American support has never matched Cummins or Caterpillar. One owner found the real components listed obsolete, not available on Volvo's own site, while a washer was cataloged at $49. Marine-specific parts like risers, manifolds, and gauge panels were never produced in volume, and when Volvo stopped stocking them, every repair became a sourcing project. Mechanics refuse Volvos not because the metal is weak, but because every hour of wrenching turns into 2 on the phone. Boats with older Volvos trade at a visible discount to the same hull running Cummins power. The next one did not just damage a product line, it ended a company's presence in an entire segment. Number 2, the Caterpillar 3116. Inline 6, 6.6 liters, turbocharged and after-cooled. This was Cat's entry into the under 350 horsepower marine market, and it wrecked their credibility so completely that the company walked away from the segment. The failure traced to a foundry overseas producing defective block castings. Blocks cracked, valves dropped. Cat recalled the bad blocks, but the news traveled faster than the fix. The successor, the 3126, carried the stain and brought its own injector sleeve troubles. One experienced owner described having either engine as making a boat virtually impossible to resell. It is a dry sleeve engine, so a rebuild means boring and sleeving rather than swapping liner kits, which runs the bill up fast. Operators who push these past 2,800 RPM to plane their hulls were running beyond the red line and accelerating every flaw. If a listing is priced well below market and the engine line reads 3116, that is a repower bill wearing a hull. The last one on this list borrowed the most famous name in diesel, Promised Economy, and spent 3 decades teaching mechanics to walk away. Number 1, the Detroit Diesel 8.2, the Fuel Pincher. V8, 4-stroke, 8.2 liters, 500 cubic inches. Late 70s through mid-80s. Credit where it is due. The nickname was earned. A pair in a 25,000-pound cruiser could deliver 8.5 knots on roughly 4 gallons an hour combined. That part of the promise Detroit kept. Everything else came undone. The original 12mm head bolts could not clamp the head gasket under sustained marine loading. When the engine ran hot, The gasket blew, the head warped, and the block cracked. Detroit upgraded to 13mm bolts, then 14. The exhaust manifolds were prone to air pockets and cracking. Later production ran better, but by then, the name was ruined. Today, roughly 70% of parts are available new. The remaining 30%, including exhaust manifolds, have not been manufactured in years. One owner trying to sell a boat with twin 8.2s reported no serious buyers, and the engines were the reason. A repower to Cummins 5.9 runs 50 to 60,000 installed. That figure lurks behind every listing, and every buyer who does basic homework finds it. When a mechanic opens the hatch, sees the fuel pincher badge, and says he needs to check his calendar, what he is really checking is whether he wants to be the last person holding a wrench when the parts catalog goes dark. Here's where the numbers live, and the listing brochure never walks you through this part. Take a 40-foot trawler with a Ford Lehman 120. A clean one trades around 60 to 80,000. Annual haul out and bottom paint runs 2 to 3,000. A slip on the East Coast or Gulf costs $12 to $20 per foot per month, putting a 40-footer at $500 to $800 a month whether you leave the dock or not. Insurance runs $1,500 to $2,000 a year. Oil, filters, impellers, belts, and zincs on the Lehman cost a few hundred a year in materials if the owner handles the work. Add it up, and the annual carry lands between $8,000 and $15,000, not counting fuel, and most of that is the slip and the insurance, not the engine. The Lehman at under 2 gallons an hour, fed with parts ordered from a farm equipment supplier, is the cheapest running diesel in the trawler world. Over a decade, you are into that boat for maybe $150,000 total. A new coastal cruiser with modern diesels starts north of $600,000. Now consider the opposite. You buy a boat priced below market because it carries an engine from the other list. The purchase price looks like a gift, but the repower bill, $40,000 to $70,000 for Cummins replacements installed, is baked into the first serious yard conversation. That figure does not include fuel tanks that may be original black iron and due for replacement, exhaust plumbing that has to be rerouted, or a transmission mismatch. The engine was never the expense that was going to sink you. It is the slip bill that compounds every month, the survey you skipped, the fuel tanks you did not scope. The mistake that undoes the deal is looking at the engine and ignoring everything around it. Every marine diesel is a borrowed engine. The Lehman 120 is a Ford truck engine with a heat exchanger bolted on. The Cummins 6 BT is a Dodge Ram diesel with a raw water pump. The 3208 started in highway trucks. The Yanmar J8 shares its bones with compact construction equipment. The 60068 comes off the same line that builds combine power units. That is not a weakness. It is the most important fact in the marine diesel world, and almost nobody brings it up. When you buy a boat, you are buying a land engine adapted for saltwater. And the question that decides everything is, how many of this exact block are still working on dry ground? If the answer is millions, Ford lorries across England, Dodge Rams on every highway, and Massey Ferguson tractors on 3 continents, the parts pipeline will outlive you, the engine and the boat. If the answer is a few thousand marine-only installations, the engine carries an expiration date set by the parts catalog, not by wear. The 8.2 never achieved the land vehicle volume to sustain a parts chain for decades. The 3116's reputation collapsed so fast the aftermarket never built the depth the 3208 enjoys. The Volvo TAMD series leaned on proprietary marinization components that existed nowhere outside the boat channel, and when Volvo stopped stocking them, the countdown began. The 6 that run forever are not running on better metallurgy. They are running on the fact that their parts are still needed by farmers and truckers who will never set foot on a dock. There they are, all 9. The Perkins 4108 leaking from the rear seal and cranking on the first turn for 60 years. The 3208 naturally aspirated V8, workhorse of the trawler and lobster fleets. The Yanmar GM and JH Japanese Precision. Your mechanic greets like an old friend. The 60068, the engine that crossed oceans on oil changes alone. The Cummins 6 BT12 valve. The pickup truck diesel that brought a 1,000,000-unit parts chain below the waterline. And the Ford Lehman 120, the tractor engine that retired more people to the water than any diesel ever marinized. On the other side, the Volvo TAMD with its $49 washer and its shrinking parts book, the 3116 that cracked its own name in half, and the Detroit 8.2 fuel pincher, the engine that sips 2 gallons an hour and still costs you $60,000 standing still. Walk back to that dock where we started. The shiny boat with the problem diesel has not moved. The canvas is fading, the listing sheet is curling, and the broker stopped returning calls. The other one, the trawler with the chalky gel coat and the Lehman ticking over below, left 3 weeks ago. The owner topped off the fuel, checked the oil, dropped a spare impeller in a freezer bag beside the companionway ladder, and went. The Lehman 120 is not the most powerful engine on this list. It is not the newest or the quietest. But it shares its castings with 1,000,000 machines still working today, drinks less than 2 gallons an hour, and every part it will ever need is on a shelf somewhere, waiting. That is what runs forever actually means. It was never about the iron. It was about whether anyone is still making what the iron needs. Before you put a deposit on anything, call a diesel mechanic in whatever town the boat is sitting in. Ask one question: can you get parts for this engine? If the answer comes back with a pause, a sigh, or a suggestion to try somebody 3 states away who might have one in a shed, keep walking.